basically we have been associated with the Sri Aurobindo way of education. Since the last 4 years, we have been sending teachers to Pondicherry quite often. We have also had the pleasure of having Shivda with us here since the last 2 years, and it's a really transformative experience for schools and anyone, all the stakeholders of the school, so including the parents. Okay, I have unmuted Shivda. Uh, I think we can begin with the session. Yeah, so over to you, Shivda.
All right. Um, Warm welcome to every one of you from the city of Puducherry, where a new type of experiment was begun in the field of education a long time back, almost 1,000 years, 100 years back. And we are here to share that experiment and also its present status. And thanks to Neevam, we have selected this particular topic, exploring integral education as synthesis of the past, present, and the future. I cannot emphasize enough the importance of the topic that we have taken up, because in a certain sense, education, in a certain sense, creates the future citizens of our country and even of this world. And therefore, we can safely say that the future of this world lies in the hands of these children who are helped through an educational system that helps them to bring out the innate possibilities. So we are going to be briefly discussing about such an education system. But before we go into the topic, may I request some of the participants to switch on your video feeds, because I'm not able to see anybody except one or two people. So those who have the camera facility, could you switch on? I have one coming up. I believe at least 10-15 people before. Thank you. Vibhag VG80 has come. And I know it is the name of somebody else, but at least we have. And thank you, Shaili. And I would request a few more of you to switch on your video feeds. And thank you, Avinash Kaur, ATA, Shirisha, Shaili. We'll need a little more. And Vijayam Kartha. A few more. And then I know that at least I have a few live people to talk to. So if you can switch on your video feeds, please. All right, there are too many shy people, so we leave them to their choice. But at least when you are interacting, when you have a question to ask, please do not hesitate to switch on your video feed. And also, as we say, when you have something secret to munch, then also the video feed can be temporarily switched off. You can munch what you want and then switch on and back online. Before we enter into the exploration of integral education, a little bit about the word integral itself, because it is defined in so many different ways, and we just have to see what we mean by the word integral. The Hindi word which comes closest to the meaning of integral and integrality is Purna, the complete, even you can call it as the holistic. When we say complete, one important thing we have to understand is it is not a completion of the physical things. For example, if you have two halves of an apple, if I bring it together, I get one full apple. Now, this is integrating two halves into one. Or you take a circle and four quadrants. If you bring four quadrants of a circle together, you get a complete circle, and it is not in this sense that we will be using the word integral, because the word integral has to apply to human beings, to all of us. So according to the physical way of integrating, it is almost as good as saying you take the parts of the body of a person. For example, you take his head, his hands, his trunk, his legs, bring them all together, you get a complete person. it is as good as saying this. If you bring the body parts together of a person, will that person become a complete person? Obviously, no. What you get is a dead body. It may be a complete dead body, but unless and until life gets added and included in this body, it is not going to be a person complete in itself or in himself. So we are talking about a dimension of existence which is not material and physical alone, because by mere physicality, none of us are complete. And therefore, when we bring in the dimension of life, then we say that I am Shivakumar, and somebody can say I am Jasmine, I am Dolly, and I am this one, only when we bring in that non-physical dimension into it. So any education which tries to base everything on the mere physicality is not yet a complete education. If we look at ourselves, one way of looking at the modern current science is to ascribe everything to the physicality. For example, even emotions are a result of something getting secreted in the body. We call it as dopamine. And what about our mind, our thoughts? The thousand thoughts which are going on all the time, well, they are a result of the brain's action. So in a certain sense, the modern science looks at even our thoughts and emotions as a result of the processes happening in the body. But just 5 minutes back we saw, if we merely bring only the body parts together, and suppose if you inject dopamine into a body parts which are brought together, the part is not going to get up and say that I am so happy, thank you for injecting dopamine into my system, simply because it is another dimension of our existence which has to be there, which animates and enlivens the body and infuses it with thoughts and emotions. What happens in the body in terms of dopamine or brain activity are an indication and result of what happens in the deeper dimension. So the emotions that we feel, if we dissect the body, we are not going to find these emotions anywhere in our body. Like yesterday, I was so happy, and then I dissect myself and take out one small part from the heart and say that this was the happiness which I was feeling. No, it's not going to happen, because you're not going to find it anywhere in the system. Nor even the current thoughts that you are going through. You may be able to track the neurons and the network, but the thoughts by themselves exist, and it's a world of thoughts that we carry within ourselves, and also a world of emotions that we carry within ourselves. And without bringing these two dimensions of existence, which is an experience for every day for us, our analysis of ourselves will not be complete. And therefore, in the current system of education, one look at it and then ask ourselves how much of these two extra dimensions are dealt with, and you will find that the answer is almost next to no. If I ask you, in the education system which you and I had, which is, I'm probably assuming 10, 15, 20 years back at least, how much of our syllabus and curriculum covered the dimension of life? How do we master our life energy and emotions so that we become people who are capable of expressing ourselves by being the masters of our life energy? What does it mean? What does the life energy do? Well, one thing, at least it does 5 functions in my body. One, it helps me to breathe. Now I have to ask, can I master my breathing? Where was it covered in my textbooks? We will have to look at and see. I have a digestion system going on. Once I have digested the food, the energy has to be distributed. And these two energies, which are part of a life within me, how do I master the process of digestion? How do I master the process of distributing the energy from what I eat? Where was it covered in my textbooks? There is only a physical description of what happens when you put food, how it becomes, breaks up. But what about the mastery of the life energy itself is not yet there. Well, talk about mastery of feelings and emotions. All that has been bundled into something called psychology, and it is kept as a very specialized topic. When are you supposed to look at your own psychology? Well, it is a special subject only for people who after college choose to do psychology, and even there, psychology is not considered as a proper science, even in a large part of our world. So even that study of emotions, mastering the emotions, how many things are we talking about? Mastering our depressions, mastering our anger, mastering also our capacity to be happy, to be loving, to be compassionate, all the things which make our life much more valuable, they are by and large left out of the mainstream education. And I don't even have to go into the mental domain, which textbook actually talks about how do I know how to learn how to think, how do I control my thoughts so that I can be the most dynamic person in terms of my mental output. None of the textbook actually take up, and therefore, at some point of time in our recent past, a few people woke up, especially in 95 when Daniel Goleman woke up first. In a certain sense, he was the one who popularized that emotions are also part of us. It has to be part of the mainstream education. But even he was basing his assumptions on the materialistic science. Emotions are the result of things happening in the body, whereas our view flips it. We are primarily mental and emotional people, and the body is just a house which houses our mind and emotions, not the other way. In fact, whatever the body does, you and I do, from the morning you would have finished at least 10, 15 chores of the household. You would have probably cooked for your people at household, or probably tried to get out of cooking, because today is Sunday. Who wants to cook? We want at least one day free from working, preparing lessons for the school, as well as taking care of the house, as well as taking care of the cook. Probably you wanted to get out of it. But all these processes that we have done is the result of our intention. What we thought we should do and what we felt we should do, it ended up as actions. Just look at your own life from the morning or the life so far. What you thought became the action of tomorrow. What you felt that if I did this, I will be happy, it became an action for tomorrow. So the action of the body is a result of what we conceive in our mind and emotions. And how can we say that they are the result of something secreting in the body? It's putting the cart before the horse. Therefore, if we flip it and then look at the need of understanding and mastering these dimensions within us, without which our education will not be complete. So, this initiated by Goldman, but also taken up by several other people who have already been doing research in the domain of our emotions and our thoughts. Uh, when these researchers came, it was already going on simultaneously, not as part of mainstream education, but as an alternative stream of education. So, all that these people came up in terms of mastering the mind and its energies, mastering the life and its energies, and also through that mastering the immense capacities of the body, were all branded as part of alternative education. We need to understand this and why they are called alternative education. But the mainstream education, as at least especially if you look at India, because that is what we are primarily concerned with, even if we look at education in India, even in India, where such exploration of mind and emotions used to happen for at least 10,000 years back, if not more than that, we have even labeled the schools that focus on mastering our emotions and our mind also as alternative education, because for us what we have been doing for 10,000s of years, and except for the last perhaps 1,500 years, should have been the mainstream education, and what came from outside should have been alternative, but somehow we got it upside down. No wonder, even when we are born upside down. It's the nature of the things that we are going to take up. We are taking things up in an upside down fashion, and we have to get it corrected as soon as possible. And if we have to do it, we have to understand what is being taught in the mainstream, in the name of mainstream education, and understand the significance and beauty of alternative education, and then we have to decide. So, one a little bit of history lesson on what is going on by the name of mainstream education. If you look at our education, I know it is split up into several subjects, and some of the main subjects are by the way, if whenever I ask questions and if you feel like answering or interjecting with your questions, you can always use the chat box. And some of the people who are showing their face on the video, and for any simple question, if you want to say yes, it can be a simple thumbs up. And if you want to say no, it can be a thumbs down so that I would understand. And others, please resort to the chat box. But we come back to a little look at what is going on in the name of mainstream education. I don't really have to share with you elaborately because it has almost become a common knowledge that what we follow the subjects and by and large the syllabus, the content of education was initiated by the Britishers somewhere in the 18th century. And it is interesting. I'm going to quickly take you, no elaborate details, because in the 18th century, a trading company, group of industrialists by the name East India Company came to know that there is a very, very wealthy country, and a wealthy country going through its weakest phase. Now, interesting, it's a combination. Why weakest phase? Because by the 18th century, India was already invaded and weakened by the Mongol invasion and also the Mughal invasion, and therefore the country as a whole was going through a very weak phase in terms of its virility, output, creativity, and all that was genuinely held as India. If you go 1,000 years back and start tracking the history of India, it tells a different story. And after that, when you come to India, all that we keep hearing is invasion after invasion of the people. So the Mongol came, the Mughal came, and the Dutch came, the French came, and the English also came. Why do all these people want to come to India? And that gives us a clue that here is one country which must have been so beautiful, so brilliant in its wealth of life, not only the material wealth, but the richness of its culture, not only spices that we have, but the spicier life that we have was an attractive thing for all those people who wanted to invade India. Just to see how many people came to India, and they did not come here with the idea that let me do some charity work in India. I'm here to help the people of India. No, they came here because something is available. If we can loot it, then we can return with both our pockets full, and probably not only the pant pockets, but even the shirt pocket and any bags that I carry also. That was how much wealth which was still there in India during the period of invasion. So when these people under the name of East Indian Company came, they came and they found that even at its weakest period in India's history, people were resisting to accept the industrialists setting up their industries and making money from India. And therefore, these people, when they looked at the condition of India, how do we get the best out of India and take it back home? They said it's impossible to work on the people unless we start working on their children before they have acquired the fancy ideas which India used to carry. And what are these fancy ideas India used to carry? Well, for the English people, it was fancy, outdated, impractical ideas. But look at these things which are very much Indian, and even now they are coming back as very modern idea. So, what is these Indians were telling? They say that inside every one of us, there is a part within which carries an infinite amount of wisdom, knowledge, strength, and beauty and harmony. And the life is meant to bring it out so that each one of us will have to figure out how to do it. And in order to do that, there has to be a life system, an organized community which permits this free exploration. So here is a country where it is implied that we are here to bring out something so beautiful on the inside of everybody, a kind of a perfection on the inside. It's not the same for everybody. Each one has a different combination and different flavor. Our life is meant to bring out what we carry within. There's nothing that needs to be given from outside except plenty of information. Like what is going to be the weather now, what is the status, you want to go to another place, what is the train available, flight available. These are all informations that can come from outside, but what comes from inside is going to determine our life. And this was, if that has to happen, and if the inside of me and you and other people is not the same for everybody, what type of life should be there? A life of freedom, a life where everybody is allowed to choose his or her own path. Now, this is so beautiful. Now, if you hear the word tolerance or inclusiveness, you think it's a wow, it's a beautiful concept. Let us include these people, all the people who are not of the mainstream society. Such a fabulous idea. This is an idea of 21st century, but here is an ancient India where it said that every one of us carries something so precious within that nobody can be said to have somebody who is not useful to the society or of less value. And because we carry this within, everybody has to get equal opportunity. Now, is this a concept of just inclusiveness? No. Inclusiveness came as a result of excluding a few people. And that is a countermeasure, whereas in India, from time immemorial, we said everybody has something beautiful inside and everybody has to be part of life. Now, if this is one of the approaches in India, I have to share with you in my own family. I grew up in Kerala, by the way. My family, I have two more brothers and one sister. So we are four people, father, mother, and auntie and it was a family which used to live together. Interestingly, each one of us used to worship one God of our own choice. Now, my mom had some Christian friends, so she has taken up and she regularly keeps a photograph of Jesus Christ, and then she will put on flower to that photograph. Father, he will have all the Hindu deities. His favorite was one goddess and Devi, and then he will have the photograph. My favorite was Lord Kartigeyan. So I will carry a small photograph Kartigeyan, and when I go to the puja room, I will put my flowers only to Kartigeyan, and then just to say hello to all the other photographs, and I come out. And my brother, his favorite was Ganeshji, and so there is a Jesus Christ photograph, Ganeshji, Lord Kartigeyan, and let me tell you, we never had a single fight about anything about whose God is the better one or whose God is the best, whether they exist or not. Each one comes and then worships the God. Just imagine the possibility of such a thing existing anywhere else in the world. I just dare challenge any one of you. 6 people in a family, each one of them following their own gods and also their own way. I know Karthikeyan is a warrior god. So most of the time, I am in a rebellious and warrior mode. And my brother, who is kind of following Ganeshi, fond of eating, so he will be after then eating a little bit, and each one of us are allowed to without entering into conflict. You call this inclusiveness? Well, if you call this inclusiveness, it's at least 10,000 years old in India. Each one of us is allowed to follow his or her own choice of path. Well, that is also an ancient old, and these are currently called alternative stream, and that is where we have to bring it back and make it into the mainstream. So if we go back to at least 300, 400 years back and look at what the East India Company achieved, they came here because India was very wealthy country. They wanted to take some of its wealth away, and they wanted to catch hold of all the children and brainwash them a little bit so that they start working for the industry set up by them. And now their problem was anybody who wants to come and work under them should not have too much initiative, should not be thinking for themselves, should not say that inside everybody there is a soul and therefore everybody has to be treated equally. No. And because they cannot be demanding these things, any book, any textbook, any idea which promotes this were conveniently left out of our syllabus. So out went some of the books which we are still not brought back into the mainstream, which talk about inclusiveness, which talk about gender equality. Now look at how India used to look at man or woman. It said the soul inside is the same and it is to be given equal opportunity. What more gender equality do you need? We think gender equality is a modern concept, but it is an ancient concept. Where was it described? Where was it discussed? This concept of something beautiful that we carry within? Well, in the textbooks of the old education system. And that is where we get an idea of the most beautiful things which were said. Unfortunately, it is not yet part of our educational system. If we have to ask you any questions about the Vedas, the books containing deep inner knowledge, it's not there part of any mainstream education. If I can ask you about Bhagavad Gita, well, they are branded as spiritual. By spiritual, they mean not fit for our normal life, and they are not yet part of the mainstream education. If I have to talk to you about Upanishads, and again, they are not yet part of our system. These are actually books containing the wisdom of thousands of years of explorations of India. They are practical textbook where every theory has been tested, verified, and formulated in the form of aphorism. Such thing, just as how a mathematician will come up with an equation or formula, these have been done. Now, all these were systematically left out of our syllabus, which is brought in by the East India Company because they wanted to take over the minds of the Indian people. When that went out, what we are left with is what the subjects that we even now we are following, the things that we know in the name of physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and the social science in the name of history and geography and all the other things. I want to share with you one observation which is the root of our, by and large, existing mainstream education. So I'm going to share with you one person's who was specially called in to come to India, and then he submitted what is called the Minute on Indian Education. His name was Macaulay, Lord Macaulay, very famous person. I'm sure everybody would know him. And also the important statement that he shared with the British Raj so that they can change the content of the education. So this is what he said. I'm going to share my screen. And if Hardik can give me a thumbs up if the screen is visible. All right, Justin is giving me a thumbs up. Now, Macaulay's tenure in India was in the 19th century when the British government was about to take over the governing from the East India Company and bring it under its own dominated country. So it was in this time that Macaulay was asked to study and gave a suggestion on what type of education should be given to India. Now, this is what he has come up with. The first paragraph is actually gist of what he is going to come up with. I will just read it. You just have to follow what is given here. Hence, this is a summary, and after that, his own quote will come. Hence, he's talking about the schooling, and he's talking about the schooling from the 6th year onwards. He says, when we take children, because they are too small, the mother tongue cannot be avoided, and therefore he permits the use of mother tongue. But he says, from 6th class onwards, this has to change. Everything has to be brought up in an European way through European languages, and that is what he is going to summarize. He says, hence, from the 6th year of schooling onwards, instruction should be in European learning with English as the medium of instruction. Remember, this was done in 1834, and even now, large number of schools, this is being followed. And why should that be? Because they wanted to rule over India and then take away its wealth. But if they are not able to communicate, tell the people what is it that they need and make them work, give them instruction and make them follow instructions, they will not be able to get the money. And how can that happen unless two things happen? One, the whole of India is able to converse in English, or the English can converse in 1,900 and odd Indian languages, which is an impossibility for them. So they wanted to create an intermediate group of people. And what type of intermediate group of people? And this is what he says. This would create a class of anglicized Indians who would serve as cultural intermediaries between the British and the Indians. What are these people who will go through the educational system which will be set up by the British government? What will they do? So they are supposed to be the intermediate, meaning they will have to understand the instructions from the British authorities and then pass it on to Indians who speak so many different languages. And it is in order to groom and create this intermediate group of people that the educational curriculum was set up in terms of what the British Raj needed for the English people to learn and follow. I'm going to read the exact wordings from from Macaulay's Minute of Education. So this is what how he summarizes. He says, I feel that it is impossible for us with our limited means to attempt to educate the body of the people. We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. So there is a governed millions of people and there is a governing few select English people, and there needed to be an intermediate people, a group of obedient people who act as the link. A class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, in opinions, in morals and intellect. So that they know what the English know, they know their physics and chemistry and biology, but these group of people need not know anything which is originally Indian. How Indians' inclusiveness was there, how India already was practicing gender equality, how India had already achieved so many more things before the invasions have started. And then Macaulay continues, to that class, we may leave it to refine the vernacular dialects of the country, to enrich those dialects with terms of science borrowed from the Western nomenclature. Now, here is the thing. There are so many normal things in our life for which we have stopped using our own vocabulary. How many people use your own mother tongue for, let us say, something as simple as cycle, motorbike? Just imagine table, chair, and actually, if you try to say these things in Hindi, I don't even know how or what you will say, or in Tamil, my language, people will run away from me or look at me with a strange look on their eyes. What is he talking about? Because we have borrowed from the Western nomenclature even the names for our everyday thing. And in the process, we have forgotten part of the language that belongs to us, which is natural and spontaneous for us. And in a certain sense, our language being so refined, because they find their base in a most refined language, Sanskrit, which even the NASA scientists say that this is one of the well-defined, perfect language, even for the cutting edge science as artificial intelligence. So our languages, most of them derived from Sanskrit, carrying that perfection, that finesse, is somehow been substituted with Western nomenclature. And even now, you and I are talking in a language which is borrowed from not from India. This is a peculiar situation to India. And then to render them by degrees fit vehicles for conveying knowledge to the great mass of publication. I don't know how many of you will be able to communicate the modern science in your own vernacular languages, Hindi and Bengali and Gujarati. You will be stuck at every corner, even mathematics, you will be stuck at every corner and you will be mumbling, what do you call that, chair and table, what is the local terms for it, and you will be stuck with because of this. Now, this is an important thing that I have shared with you because we know in our mind, in our head, that this is what has happened, but we have not yet internalized and digested. We have not yet felt from our heart that this is the root of, by and large, the modern education, especially the mainstream education. Because if we have not caught it in our heart, it will not enter into a phase of action. And if we have not felt what we have lost and what got substituted, we will not make an attempt to bring it back into our thing. Now, the question always comes, what is it that we are trying to bring back? Now, it seems very vague. We know that if I ask you the question that how much of the physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics that you and I have learned in our life, how much have we put it into practice and used in our own life? If I have to ask you as a percentage, some of the mainstream subject, physics, chemistry, biology, when you are sitting on the chair, are you already recalling those long chemical equations of plastic and other things which you must have learned in 6th, 7th, or 8th classes? Not really. There are so many things in our life where what we have learned over a period of 16, 17 years of education has not been part of our mainstream life. All those beautiful second degree equation and third degree equation and cos theta by sine theta, if I have to frankly ask you, unless and until you are a NASA scientist or in our own places, our own aeronautical space, if you are not a scientist, how many of you would have actually made use of everything that you have learned in the name of physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and other things which are the mainstream subject? Can I go for one kind of a chat box survey on, you consider your education from standard 1 to +2, that makes it 12 years of education before you specialized and went into college. If you consider this as 100% education, as a percent, how much percentage of that would you have utilized in your life, part of your life, not in your classroom? Because then mathematics teacher will say that 100% I'm using in my maths classroom. I'm going to ask that mathematics teacher, when you step outside the classroom, when you go to a supermarket or a mall, or when you are figuring out, which mobile company gives the maximum scheme. Nowadays they have increased the rates of the mobile data too. Unless and until you are engaged in a calculation of life, we are not going to consider. Can anybody take a few seconds to reflect and then punch in digits in terms of a percentage? If somebody feels that 50% of what I have learned over the years, I have utilized in my life, not in the classrooms, if you're a teacher, but outside of the classroom, just type out so that I can honest. This has to be an honest answer from yourself. Just imagine, in the name of physics, how many equations and theories and complicated calculations you did. In the name of chemistry, how many more complicated equations and chemical equations that you went through. In the name of mathematics, integration, calculus, higher algebra, higher trigonometry, all that you have, and the innumerable things in the name of science, social sciences you have, in the name of history. How many data has gone into your head? Start typing out the percentage so that I can at least see whether anybody is having maximum percentage, because I already see somebody from 5, 10, 25%, and Tanu has said 50%. Somebody has said Faraday's box. How many of you remember even Faraday's box? Well, unless if you are raising your hand, I will ask you to explain it, and I will ask everybody to cross question. Can I have a honest evaluation from everybody that how much of what you absorbed or what was taught you in the name of education would you have put into practice in your real life? So it is interesting, and by and large, what I see is 1 or 2 people 25%, but almost everybody is 20% and below, except for Tanu, who is the maximum lone person who has gone up to 50% has been put into. So I'm going to request Tanu to just describe a little bit of her background so that we get to know. And I'm guessing probably some special circumstances in which 50% of what went into her during that educational period, she was able to put into practice. So, is Tanu able to speak? If so, Tanu will have to unmute and then share with us, because you are the only person who has gone beyond 25%. Otherwise, still I'm getting the numbers as 10% seems to be the one.
Yeah, I have
Yes.
unmuted her.
Tanu, go ahead. Are you in a position to speak? Or some side businesses going on? If so, you can lunch, finish it, and then come back and join us. All right, Tanu has gone mute once again. So we will move on. And what I'm seeing is 10%. If I have to ask you, how do you feel about an education of which 10% or below has been practically useful in your life? And end up with a question, would you like to give such an education to your own children? Just a simple question. Would you like to put your children through at least 15 years of education where only 10% or below is going to be useful in his life? And what is the 10% and below? Even in the 10% below, if I ask you everybody individually, you are not going to say the content, but you are going to say the degree that you have earned, because of which you got a job, because of which, and when you join the job, and if it's a good job, I tell you, they will give you training, and you have to learn what is needed from your bosses, and that is not going to come actually from what you have learned. So even in the 10%, the utility and value of the majority is going to be in just getting the job. Now, this is a question which I want every one of us to carry it in our heart. Are we ready to make all our children go through an education where only 10% of what he or she is going to learn is going to be practically useful? And just imagine, we are talking about 15 years at least of education, and of which 90% of a student life, we are simply cramming the child with so many things which is not going to use at all. The 10% also, it's in terms of from which college you passed out from and what marks did you get, and it's just a few numbers which you might be finding it useful in order to get a job, but not because of the content and not because of what was covered. If this is so, and if we want to change, I'm assuming that every one of us, if we feel in our heart that 90% of the most productive, most beautiful period of life in a child is being utilized for giving him something which is not going to use, how many of us even feel the pain of it? And how many of us feel the possibility that if only we gave the child something better, how much more beautiful the child's life is going to be? Just imagine, because these are the children who in future will become politicians and doctors and scientists and name anything. These are the people who are going to become, if only we gave the child something which helps the child to realize the possibility that each of them carries within themselves. And if they become full-fledged, integral human beings, remember, Purna Manushya, if they can become, just imagine the type of life that we end up with, even if we achieve 10% of this ideal, just imagine how much more beautiful. Now I am flipping it. Now the question is, what is that education which was there in India before the invasions have started? That's a very interesting question. If I ask you what are the subjects of the modern education, of course you will say physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, and then history, geography, civics, and all the other things. If I ask you before the invasion started in India, what do you think? Maybe because in that time also the schools were going on, we just call it as Gurukul. The teachers were there. Instead of calling them teachers, we call them as Guru or Acharyas. But the education was going on. What do you think will be the subjects which were covered before the invasions have started? And if I ask you, anybody, almost every one of you will have a difficulty. Why am I asking these questions? Because before the invasion started, India, if you look at India, well, it was not even called India, it was called Bharat. And there was a cultural identity, and it was not a political identity, but something more fundamental, more deep rooted, which was specific to the people who are living on this side of the river Sindhu. And that is why from the name Sindhu, everybody came to be called as Indian. But other than that name given to, we modern generation don't have much of a clue as to what were the subjects which were there, for example, 1,000 years back. Why am I asking this? Because just 1,000 years back, if you ask any historian of repute, he will say that India was one of the best countries in terms of achievements in almost every field. Now, this is not me who is saying, this is the consensus of the historians and the people who study the history. And I want to share with you just one quotation from Sri Aurobindo, where in just that he brings out the beauty of what was India before the invasions happened. So I'm going to share with you beautiful quotation, one of my favorite quotations. I'm going to share my screen with you, and this is something that every one of us need to reread, just to understand what happened in India. This is a quote from Sri Aurobindo, who studied deeply the India, who also studied in West and understood the Western history. And when he came back to India during the year 1893, that was the year when Sri Aurobindo, after finishing his education in Oxford, returned to India completely aware of the best of the West because he was an exceptional student here. When he came to India, he spent the next 12 years understanding and going deeper into Indian culture. And this is coming from somebody who has digested the best of the West and the East. And this is what he has to say about India. He says, when we look at the past of India, what strikes us next is her stupendous vitality, her inexhaustible power of life and joy of life, her almost unimaginably prolific creativeness for 3,000 years at least before the invasion. And he says, it is indeed much longer. She has been creating abundantly and incessantly, lavishly, with an inexhaustible many-sidedness. Now you have to ask a question. You are talking about many-sidedness richness. What is it that India was creating? And Sri Aurobindo gives a list of what India was creating in those times. And here is the list. Republics and kingdoms and empires. In most of the other countries, there was only one empire, one kingdom, which dominated the entire country, because of which only one language, one lifestyle was followed, one religion was followed. But here is a country where republics, several kingdoms, several empires, and several philosophies and cosmogony. For those of you who do not know cosmogony, it's a branch of science that talks about evolution of the life, evolution of the cosmos, of the world itself. Now, this is a country where not one philosophy and one way of looking at how we evolve. You see, the modern world started thinking about evolution only after Darwin came up with his theory of evolution, but we had the theory of evolution thousands of years back itself. So, republics and kingdoms and empires, philosophies and cosmogonies. I have to tell you something about the philosophy. Just look at the wideness of Indian mind. it permitted every deep insight into the life philosophy, how life has to be evolved. So much so that if you think that only God and the divine and spirituality was talked about in the ancient India, you are mistaken. There was one philosopher called Charvaka. I don't know whether you have heard of him. He is more materialistic than the most materialistic you can come across. What did he say? He says, this life is the only one you have and live it to the fullest. Now just imagine, he's considered a philosopher. What do you mean by living to the fullest? He says, if necessary, beg, borrow money from everybody and then live it to the fullest, because when the time comes, when you die, well, it's a problem of the other people who have lent you money. As long as you are alive, borrow, beg, steal money, and you drink ghee every day. Even if you are in debt, don't worry. Either the government will write off or the death will come and write off all the debts you have. This is the beautiful philosophy which is encapsulated in one sentence. It says, Runam Kritva Grinam Pibet. Runam means debt. Even by going into debt, Grinam Pibet. Drink ghee in your food. I'm sure our main focus in the last 50 days is how to make food and then make it interesting in our households, because all the outside restaurants have either shut down or we don't want to go. We would have understood the importance of having nice food. And here is somebody who says, Runam Kritva Grinam Pibet. Now he says there is no guarantee that there will be a next, and he is considered to be one of the philosophers in India, and that is how wide ranged thoughts were permitted in India. So philosophies and cosmogonies and sciences and creeds and arts and poems. Now in India, it was not that only the physical sciences were given more importance, but arts and poems were given less importance. This never happened in the ancient India. They were all equally expressions and result of explorations of the people of India, and therefore they were all were there in India. In fact, it was said that 64 types of art was there in our old universities. We talk about the old universities. Two come to my mind, at least the modern scientists have discovered, Nalanda and Takshashila. It was said that more than 10,000 students came, and innumerable branches of science was taught here. People from all over India used to come to these two universities to learn what India has to teach. Now, I continue the list, and all kinds of monuments, palaces, and temples and public works. The list doesn't end here. Communities and societies. If you take a parikrama of India by walk, Pada Parikrama, every 50 to 100 kilometers, you will come across a different community speaking a different dialect of language, eating different types of food, following different type of lifestyle. Like if you're in Gujarat, you go, they'll put sari, pallu in one way. If you come to South India, it will be different. And here in South India, you'll encounter people eating idli and dosa. Well, if you go to Punjab, go carefully, because they are going to stuff you with parathas dipped in ghee, stuffed with aloo and other things right in the morning itself. And that is unimaginable in South India. Just 100 kilometers you travel, new community, new society, new religious order, new lifestyle, new laws and codes and rituals. This was India, and yet there was a deep connecting factor to our country, Bharat, India. Now comes, the list again continues, physical sciences and psychic sciences. So in India, we don't only explore the physical sciences, but we said the psychology of people also has to be a science, and the science through which they explored the psychology, there was a name given to it. It's called yoga. Yoga is nothing but an exploration of the psychological science, which every one of us go through. So the systems of yoga, systems of politics, administration, art, spiritual, and art, what people call as commercial art. and what people call as spiritual art, because when we go to the temples of India, you'll find the most beautiful art, which is a result of the spirituality. But India was not only that, arts worldly, the commercial arts too, trades, industries, fine crafts, the list is endless. And in each item, there is almost a plethora of activity. Now, he says the final word. She, meaning Mother India, Mother Bharat, creates and creates and is not satisfied and is not tired. We cannot say that in the modern age, this spirit of abundant and infinite creativity has taken a backseat. No, she will not have an end of it, seems hardly to need a space for rest, a time for inertia. Everywhere there is a teeming of a super abundant energy of life. Now, I'm going to take a pause here. Why did I share this with you? Well, to ask only one question. What type of education made India to be so super abundantly creative is just the question I wanted all of us to ask. And if we start asking the question, then if we get the answers, then we know what needs to be done in the field of education. So for this, I have a small activity. I hope everybody is carrying a pen and a paper with you, because yes, thank you, Shaili and Avinashi. So here is a couple of questions which will help us to re-emphasize the points. We know that the industrialized education, which is meant to create a group of intermediaries who can intermediate between the bosses and the governors and the governed, is what is aimed as the current mainstream education. Because after you finish your education, what are you supposed to do? You have to go and work for somebody. And you to go and work for somebody means what? You have to work to earn profit for the governors. And how do you do it? By exploiting the governed. So even if you get a nice job like, managing director or general manager or somebody who is in charge of several things, what does the education prepare you? It prepares you to be the intermediary between what? Between the management and employees. So if you are not in either of these things, you have to mediate. So whatever the management decides, the intermediary people, the in charges, they will have to make the employees do it. And why do they have to do it? Because they have to earn profit for the companies. Just imagine you are sending your children to an education, 90% of which is not going to be relevant for his life. But in that 10%, what are you making him? To go and earn profit for somebody else. In the process, you will get a few thousands. Is this the life we want our children to live? Is the question I wanted every one of us to carry. Feel the pain of it, that an entire country is making their children go through something of which 90% is not relevant. Do we feel it? In fact, every day when we go to sleep and when we wake up in the morning, if we don't think about it, feel the pain of what we are making our children go through, if we don't wake up with tears in my eyes, if we don't go to sleep with tears in my heart, then I have not felt the current plight of our education. Remember, this is an education which was decided by a group of which you and I are part. And in fact, this education was brought into India a few hundred years back. And those who brought it have left the country. But the intermediary group consisting of you and I, there is no point in us to continue with the same system of education. But let us imagine, I'm going to ask everybody to imagine, tomorrow the Indian government, the educational board says that from tomorrow onwards, all the schools can decide their own curriculum, their own syllabus, and they can have their own board. You can have whatever subjects you want. And now, can we bring back India to its glory, where not only the best of the past, but it is capable of meeting the future too? If such is the situation, as a parent, as a teacher, as a headmaster, as a principal, do you have any clue as to the type of subjects you want to bring it into our schools, into our homes? Because I'm considering our home also as school, probably school number 2 or school number 1. But whatever you can, we cannot leave this only to school, because what happens in the school has to happen in the home too, and what happens in the home also has to happen in the school as an extension. So these two are extensions of each other. And if I have to ask you, the headmasters of the school which we call home and the headmasters of an institute which we call it school, do we have any idea if by a miracle given the opportunity, what subjects we would like to have? Now take up a paper and take up a pen, and here is the question: that write down the top 5 things you want to see developed in the children if you are given the full control of the two schools, the school that we call home and the school that we call, well, school. The top 5 things you would like to see developed in children. And if you have more, no harm. If you have a list of 10, write down, but order them in the order of importance, and then keep the 5 things ready, because the future of India is going to be depending on this. You as a parent, the headmaster of the home, and you as a principal, as a headmaster of the school, it's going to.
Shivda, I think we have lost you. We can't hear you. Yeah, you're back.
I get one yup.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yes, Saurav, I see a thumbs up.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
If some more of you can switch on your video feeds and give me a thumbs up. There is also a thumbs up which is part of your chat box. If you are finished, just put up a thumbs up.
Shivda, can you just repeat the question because we lost you in the middle?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, what are the top 5 things you would like to see developed in children? There are a lot of things in the name of education at school, education at home. You want these things to be developed, and you want to see these things developed in your children. So, make them a list. I want the top 5. For example, I want my child to have the capacity to be happy as and when he wants. The capacity to be happy. I'm just giving an example. If so, if you feel that this is important, I want my child to be happy in spite of the outer situation. I want my child to have the capacity to be happy. Write it down. This is what I want to see developed in my child. Write it down as one of it. Now, this is what I meant. The top 5 things you would like to see developed in children, the capacities, the talents, whatever else you would like to call it. So if you finished the list of 5, switch on the video and give a thumbs up, or use the digital thumbs up to. There's a digital hand. If you press the hand, then I will take it as a symbol that you have finished the list of 5. Well, I'm already seeing, I want my child to adapt to difficult situations. Somebody has said, Vinidas, astrology, astronomy, navigation science, geography, self-introspection, literature, arts, economics, and so many. Well, Shaili and Shirisha Power has said, and I hope Shirisha Power will not think of a child as how will he earn money for his livelihood, because all the subjects which I see are not money-making subjects. Shirisha, good luck to you.
No, it was the answer to the question what has been taught in Gurukuls in old days. So I have written these things.
There you are. So she
Yeah.
knows a little more of what happened in the Gurukuls.
Yep.
And somebody has said emotional education, financial education, spiritual education, life skills. All right. I'm going to assume that most of you have at least written 3, 4. Now, against this, you have to write something more also. If you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, against this, here is the next question. Which current subjects, which is taught in the school, include the possibility of doing these? If you say, wow, no, mathematics, no, it's going to make my child emotionally well-being, and is going to help him to pick up life skills, patience, tolerance, some of the things I'm reading out. If mathematics is going to teach, I don't know, it might happen to the teacher. I'm doubtful if it will happen to children. So which current subjects include the possibility of doing this? If we cannot find any current subjects doing this, leave it blank. Confidence, enthusiasm. I'm sure everybody must have gained a lot of confidence through physics, chemistry, biology, and mathematics. Well, the list is, it's a beautiful list that the silent one, Kanu, has again come up with a nice list. Humanity, truth, knowledge, arts, respect and tolerance. It's an interesting thing. When you know that inside everyone, there is a possibility of a genius sitting inside, do you even have to tolerate anybody looking at the possibility? Do you even have to talk about inclusiveness? Just having the power to sense that possibility within every child and every adult too. Well, respect and tolerance and inclusiveness and gender equality are natural and automatic. So I'm going to give you 1 more minute for you to finish the next question, because I see a lot of people are already stuck with the first question in typing out. I know, just hold on the typing out of the first question. The second question is, against what you have noted down, which current subject include the possibility of doing all this? 1 minute, and then we will. You don't have to type any more answer for the first question, but in your paper, write down the answer for the second question. Well, Vivekanand Damodar has written psychology and administration, accounts, and except for life maths, I don't think these are part of school education. All right. Now, we don't have the time to go through what you have written, but if you have found any of the contemporary mainstream main subjects giving you the top 5 that you expect, you are in safe hands. Please follow it up, get in touch with the school authorities, and make it help them to bring it to a completion. That's all I can say. But if majority of you couldn't find any mainstream subjects giving us what we want, the top 5 things that we want to see in our children, then we need to look at an education which is radically different from the existing education. The existing education, 90% is not going to be relevant in our life except for 1 or 2. What is a radically different education? An education where 90% of what we cover has to be relevant to each one of the children. And not only that, I'm going to add a new factor, which has to be helpful to the teachers and parents too, because if they are in the process of imparting an education which doesn't result in their own growth, if the education which they impart to children makes them static, that is not the best of the education. So we need an education which is radically different. We need an education which, one thing, if we can agree, I think we can make it as a starting point. Would you say that in this new type of education, the child has to be at the center of this education and the development of the inner possibility of the child has to be our focus? Now, how many would disagree with me? If so, just write something in the chat box. But if you agree with me, till now, the industry and preparing people to work in the industry was the center of our education. What is a radically different one? The radically different one, the child and bringing out the capacities and possibility of the child so that the child becomes a complete human being. If this is to be at the center of this education, this is what we need. I hope everybody would agree. We call it as a child-centered education. All right. I want to go a little deeper into it and then see that where does the integral education fit in. When we say child-centered education, for the last 20 years, I've been working in the field of education, and the last few years, I have started traveling all over the country too. And when I reach out to parents and teachers who tell me that we are very child-centered, I ask them, some of the parents, and this is the reply they get, no, when I feed my child every day, I ask him, beta, tumhe kya chahiye? What do you want to eat? You want to eat upama? He will say no. What do you want? He will say, mujhe wo chips chahiye, this. Oh, I respect. And in order to make the child-centered education in the home, I'm supposed to ask her, beta, what can we have today? How can a child know what is good for him? And also tell the mother that this is what my system needs, unless and until the child is very, very conscious of his body, which has not happened through our education. And even at the school, if you are going to ask the child, well, you try asking today, do you want to have physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology? You know what answer you are going to get based on. And ask the child, do you want to have sports? Do you want to go for a singing? Do you want to have a dancing? You know what type of answer you are going to get. In the name of child-centered education, well, if you have to ask the child, I tell you, you will be in deep trouble. Because sometimes a child will say very essential things. Sometimes the child, being also very ignorant of things, he will ask for totally harmful things too. Why? There are so many children who get exposed to a variety of things in the world. There is an informational overload happening through television, through people, through news channels, that the child is a complete mess of the information overload, because of which you don't know what is going to come out of the child. And therefore, if you think that the child-centered education means asking the child, we can keep it aside. So we want a child-centered education where we are not going to ask the child what is best for him. We are going to sense what is best for the child. Remember, the most important difference, because just imagine in the kindergarten, lower classes, how do you ask the child? Child is not yet able to articulate anything. He has not yet picked up even the linguistic faculty. How is going to say, tell you that what are the things that he wants to? And therefore, and yet it is true that he needs certain environment where all his possibilities can come out. He cannot tell you or give you a lecture on this is what I need. If he cannot give you a lecture, then what is the best thing that we can do? We will have to sense. And if we have to sense and then come up with something in the name of education, that education should be something that will help the child to grow at its own pace, in its own way. Two important things. Not every child is going to grow at the same pace. Not every child is meant to be a lawyer or a mathematician or a doctor or an artist or a musician or I don't know, whatever else is there. And every child has its own path through which he will become. So anything that I bring in the name of education has to help the child to grow at its own pace, in its own way. And this is not the same for all the children. And how do we do it? In order to do it, we will have to look at how a child grows and see if everything is individual and unique and different for each children, each of the child. How can we do anything common in the name of education? Now that is the second problem. So if you agree to the fact that every child is unique, they are different from each other, can we conclude that what is in one child is never found in other child? No, there are certain common things also. For example, wanting to be happy, wanting to sing and dance. There are so many things which are common to children. Wanting to take care of their body so that they are in charge of their body. Wouldn't you say that this is common for every child? As soon as the child is born, the first 5-6 years, what is the most important thing for a child? As the child grows up, as soon as the child is born, the child wants to move around, and in order to move around, it has to gain control over its muscles. It has to learn to coordinate. You remember, those of you who have children, you remember after you have given birth to a child, how the child first started flipping over, then it started crawling all over. Then suddenly one day it was trying to get up, it fell down, get up, it fell down. And then at some point it started walking. And when it started walking, it started climbing all over. No, it started climbing the steps, your almiras, wherever, whatever you keep, it started climbing over. It started running and it was gaining control over its own body. At that time, it was not asking, "Arey, mummy, election is going to come. Which is the best party to vote?" Did any of your children below 5 years ask that question? Should we vote for Modi ji? How is he performing? Or should we vote for Congress? Was these the topics of interest for children around below 5 years, 6 years? No. In fact, he did not know anything that is happening outside of your home. Because at 6 years, you put to school, he at least start going to the school and the house, he gets to know a little more. So at that initial period of a child, the focus of the child is to be at ease with his own physicality, with his own body. At that age, you will have to help the child to gain proper habits of eating, sleeping, and also gaining control and coordination over the body, isn't it? Now, the child at that age, below 5 years, you don't send the child for, let us say, an art class or a music class so that he becomes a musical expert and art. That will come much later. In the initial stage, the base has to be prepared, and what we call as an education concerning the mastery over the physical part, a foundation of the physical part, let us call it as the physical education. And this physical education is the first initial component of a complete education, Purna Shiksha. Because this is how a child starts its life. But as the child grows up, more dimension, you remember I told you about what are the two other dimensions which are part of the inquiry of alternate education? Well, the domain of the life energy, feelings and emotions. Now, after 5-6 years of the child has emotions, but they are very crude. You ask a child to control his emotion, will the child be able to do it? The child gets angry. You say, Baba, it's not good. You have to control the emotions. No, you have to start counting 10 to 1 backwards. You think it's going to work with children? They are bundles of energy. The emotions are bursting forth. And when it is bursting forth, You cannot control a 5-year, 6-year-old child or 4-year, 3-year-old. They're not in a position to control because the controlling will more when a certain possibility, a certain maturity happens. After 5-6 years, the possibility of controlling the emotions comes. How do we control the emotions? If you are angry, if you are sad, if you are happy, there is a beautiful way of expressing these emotions. I still remember the old Purana, Ganas in the film Ganas and other things. Even when they were sad, they will express with the most beautiful song or an art or any of the poem, drama, theater. So some of the things are the things that help us to express our emotions in the most beautiful way. They are also a means to refine our emotions. We are not very crudely emotional people. Anger comes, it sweeps us away. Depression comes, everything is looking bad. Happiness comes, we are not able to contain, we are jumping all over. No, it's not the emotions should be masters of ourselves. We should be masters of the emotion. Now, this is the second stage where a character of a child is built up. The child learns to be master of his emotions, learn to express himself or herself through the emotions. And the child gains a mastery of art and music and dance and drama and poem. Just imagine a child who has learned it. Will the child be very crude in the expressions? When he's depressed or sad, well, he will pick up a paper and start drawing. He will sing a song, and in that refined expression, he will gain back the control of himself. Now, this is a second stage, and this is a stage which we call it as the emotional development. The mother, who is the proponent of integral education, the mother of Sri Aurobindo Ashram in Puducherry, calls this second stage as the vital education because the vitality which starts coming out is gradually mastered. So much so that the child is master of his emotions. He can choose to be happy in spite of anything untoward that is happening. And as a child reaches 10, 12 years, you will notice that a third dimension of the child opens up, which is the dimension of logicality, questioning things with the idea of getting answers. He will ask, why is this? Why is this happening? Mama, why are you doing this? You told me this should not be done, but you are doing the exact opposite things. The logic and the comparison and noting down the difference, all the mental things will open up when the child passes beyond around 10 years of age. There's no rigid timeline for this, but the third dimension, the dimension of the mind opens. That is the time we must help the child to become master of his own mind. What does it mean? Right now, if I have to ask you, is the thinking process completely under your control? Can you stop your thoughts when you want to? Can you dynamically think when you want ideas? Can you logically and coherently explain something when you have something important to communicate? No, we are far away between that stage. But in the third stage, if we have helped the child to become master of his mind, he will be so good with it, so dynamic that every problem that comes in his way in his life, he will already be ready with 10 solutions. So you see, in an integral education, you can see there is a common 3 stages of development. The child doesn't start with the mental education first, talking to you, discussing about things in the initial stages. It starts with becoming familiar with the body. It transitions into expressing and refining its emotion, and finally ending up with gaining control over the mind. But in and through this, there is a fourth dimension, which is the most important thing, and that is what we've already shared, that every child is meant to be something in this world. And who decides what the child is meant to be? Well, we parents. Who else, isn't it? No, it's not the parents who decide what the child is meant to be. You become a lawyer because there is so much demand for lawyer, or you become an IT professionalist because everybody's into computer. Well, that then become an IT professionalist. But for a child, how do we know what is meant to be? because of which he need to have mastery over his physical part, his emotional part, and his mental part. All this is for what? All this is for one purpose, a purpose which we have come to fulfill in this earth, and that is there deeply embedded inside our heart into a fourth dimension called the soul dimension, or you can call it as the true spiritual dimension. It is that which has to tell, I am meant to be this, and therefore I will train my body, I will train my emotions, I will train my thought also in order to become what I am meant to become. Where is that available? That dimension is available. You cannot just like that look at a child and decide for him or her to become something. That is your fancy. Lot of parents look at their child as the person who makes their unfulfilled dreams real. No, they'll say, whatever I did not have in my life, I want to give my child. No, you go and then try to have all that you did not to your child. Your child's requirements are different. In your times, there was hardly any mobile phone. There was something else. Right now, probably the child is going to ask, his needs and his requirements are different. And all this, how will you design? Until and unless you gain an access to the fourth dimension. And this is the dimension, and when based on which all the other three types of education, physical education, vital education, and mental education, has to be integrated with the soul dimension. And when we have such a education, we call that education as the complete education, Purna Siksha, or an integral education. Now we will pause because the subject is so interesting, and I would have loved to interact with you going into the details and then clarifying all your doubts. But today's our interaction is meant to be just a jhalak, a glimpse of what we are doing, how painful it is. And if we have to replace it, what is the most beautiful thing which we can replace it? I just wanted to give you a glimpse. If we can have such an education, every child will bloom into the perfect person that he or she is meant to be. We will pause here, and that will conclude what I wanted to say. And everybody else who have an important deadline of going for your lunch, please quietly drop out, because I'm going to stretch this for 5 more minutes just to see whether there are any questions which is going to come up, based on which perhaps if necessary, we can have another session also. So the people who have a deadline of lunch, please go ahead